I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, chatting with writers and authors who offer an added perspective for our listeners. This is Color Between the Lines. On this edition of Color Between the Lines, we're talking with an author, Erica Kendrick, about her new children's book, Cookie Monsters. It's a story about a 12-year-old Black Girl Scout named Brooklyn Ace. Brooklyn is in a contest with another girl to sell the most Girl Scout cookies, but along the way, the story addresses the loss of a parent. The author, Erica Kendrick, has a very interesting background. She earned a psychology degree from Stanford University and an MBA in marketing and international business from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Erica was an NBA cheerleader for the Chicago Bulls before writing her novels. Some of them are Confessions of a Rookie Cheerleader and Squat Goals. But what I think is most intriguing about Erica is that she's a suicide survivor. While at Stanford, she was diagnosed with acute clinical depression and bipolar disorder. Today, she is a national mental fitness speaker who shares her story and advice about mental health with thousands of people. Thank you, Erica, for joining us on the BIN.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, before we get into your book, I would love you to tell us a little bit about your personal story with suicide and how you became the success story that you are today. My understanding is that your struggle with mental illness actually started way back in the third grade, and you've had more than one suicide attempt.
Yeah, so I love that you use the word success and my name in the same sentence. Sometimes it's still rather unbelievable to think, given everything that I've experienced, getting to this point, that I'd end up on the other side of this mental fitness journey. So yeah, I started hearing a little voice in my head in the third grade. Well, it was actually a little bit earlier than that, but I can trace erratic behavior all the way back to kindergarten. But third grade was probably the most impactful, and a little voice told me to jump out of my teacher's third grade second story window. And I listened and I did it. But I was an A student, and I think that was the first year since daycare that I missed a day of school. I'd had perfect attendance up to that point as well. And for me, it got kind of shrugged off as she's just bored in class. She's A plus. She gets through her work really fast, no challenges there. And so there were those types of occasions that continued. There was a point where my mom, who is also a therapist, said, let me throw this child of mine into therapy with some of my colleagues. And so she did that, which was fantastic. But even as early as 8 years old, I understood stigma. And so I was too afraid to really share with the therapist what was actually happening inside of my brain. I kept my brain pain a big secret all the way until college, my sophomore year at Stanford, when I attempted to end my life again by driving my car off a cliff on top of one of the mountains behind the campus. And for me, I couldn't hide anymore. And something so terrifying actually ended up being probably to date one of the most liberating things that's happened to me. I was forced to kind of look this mental monster in the face and get a proper diagnosis and get some professional support around me, get some immediate intervention. And so my life from that point on has been kind of an uphill battle until I really anchored myself in wellness and designed my own personal mental fitness plan that allows me to really thrive in this life thing rather than just scrambling to survive.
Boy, this is really inspiring how you talk about how you took charge after getting help. And this is hopefully very, very helpful for those who are listening. You currently speak to large groups and to young people about this now. What prompted you to take your story to the public?
It was not by choice. I will say that. It was more my peers and the community who prompted me to bring my story home and share it for Black and Brown folks. So I like to say I do it for the culture. I was living in California, and Robin Williams ended his life by suicide. And when I sold all these thousands of boxes of Girl Scout cookies at the age of like 11 or 12, the Chicago Tribune did a story on me. And then 20 years later, the same reporter said, "Hey, I'd like to follow up and see where our cookie queen is and what you've been up to. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure," with the caveat that I'm allowed to talk about my mental health struggles. And she was kind of taken aback and said, "Okay, sure, we'll figure out how to work that in." And so that article prompted folks when Robin Williams was no longer with us to say, "Hey, Erica, I remember reading about you. Can you come talk to this group of mine about what suicide is and how do folks end up at that place when they're perceived as being happy and upbeat and in love with life?" And so one audience led to another and another. I ended up touring with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and then uh, my community said, "Hey, what about us?" Because those were mostly really large white audiences. And they had programming, they had budgets, they had financing for this topic. And in the Black and Brown communities, we just weren't even ready to have these conversations. And it wasn't because of shying away from it as much as it was not having the education around it. We didn't even have the language with which to articulate our experiences with our mental health. And I'm talking about 10 years ago. We've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years. I'm really excited about where our conversations are leading, which for me, the end result would be to getting the resources and access necessary so that we can also live very abundant lives.
That's really turning your pain into purpose. In your opinion, do you believe addressing mental health in the Black community has gotten better than in the past? And why do you think that?
I definitely think so. I'm a living testament to that. So I speak in front of all kinds of audiences. I can go down and hit several HBCUs, or I can do some big fancy conferences and keynote there. I also talk to kids in middle school and high schools in underserved communities around the country, and then, the elite schools as well. And so I see this vast dichotomy of folks having access and resources and language, and then folks asking the questions of what is depression actually? I hear it as a buzzword. What does it mean? And so then I speak to everyone in between those two ends of the spectrum. And what I've observed in the last 10 years are, well, first I'll start with the media and then the celebrity of the media. A lot of young people like to emulate their superstars. And once the superstars start talking about depression and therapy and mental health, our kiddos say, "Hey, let's talk about those things," because there's no longer this stigma attached to it if their heroes, like the Jay-Z's, are doing that. I remember when he did an interview and talked about getting therapy and how that's changed his dynamic. Then there was Mariah Carey splashed across one of the biggest mainstream magazines talking about being bipolar. So I think that that's probably the most impactful thing that can happen, because when the conversations start at that high of a level, they inevitably trickle down to the dining room table or to TikTok. And so I see a lot of people inviting me out to speak now. And these are the same groups of folks who wouldn't return my call 10 years ago when I was asking, "Hey, let me come and share my story and talk about what this thing is that's really having impacts on us that are reaching epidemic status," because our kids, our Black and Brown kids, are ending their lives by suicide at faster rates than our white peers are. And then it's still, I call it America's biggest kept secret. Suicide is the number two, it's the second leading cause of death. Gosh, that's even to say that out loud still after 10 years gets me in our country. So it beats like heart disease, and it beats drunk driving, and it beats cancer even. So when you think of it in those terms through that lens, we need to be having the conversations, and more we are. So I'm very proud of us.
Wow. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm talking to Erica Kendrick about her new children's book called Cookie Monsters. My take is that this book is really about middle schoolers, but you don't address suicide, but you do talk about the loss of a parent, and a whole lot more is involved in that. How would you, I guess, describe this book to young readers?
So I love to say that it is a super fun adventure about a 12-year-old scout, and the world is scout cookie sales. And there are two 12-year-old seventh graders that pit themselves against each other on this race to win the cookie crown. And so the main character, Brooklyn Ace, her mom just passed a year ago to cancer. And so she's dealing with the grief from that. And it really hits home. It's been a year, but it hits home now because Scout Sales was something that she and her mom did together. It was their time of year to really bond and kind of go out there and be this major force in the community, at school, and in the neighborhood. And so without her mother, it's kind of like very much in her face, and she's got to confront it. She also has generalized anxiety. And a lot of people don't know that anxiety is the number one mental health challenge affecting kids in our country. And so with that, Brooklyn decides against her will initially, but then she's all for it after a few sessions, but she decides to go back to therapy. And so my editor at Little Brown, they're phenomenal. I have two actually, but they really let me lean in. And so there are actual therapy pages in the book. There are sessions that take place between Brooklyn and her therapist, Dr. Simone, who is really fabulous with her matching striped socks and her different bow ties. And she gives Brooklyn tools that can actively help any reader who's reading this book in real life situations. And they're really de-escalation tactics. And I love this book because not only does it address Brooklyn's grief, and so anyone who's ever dealt with losing a loved one, they can get tools and resources, but also for managing stress and managing anxiety. And we know post-quarantine that our kiddos have had a lot of significant mental health challenges, as have the adults, more so than ever before. And so what I love about this, it's that it's essentially a mental health book that's wrapped in this super fun, very fast-paced, very funny, sweet, tender-hearted adventure.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny. My next question was really to talk about Dr. Simone and why did you select the therapist to be part of the story? And you totally put it there, explaining why you wanted to do that. I'm sure that the story allows the child or whoever's reading to be able to see it from a kind of a bird's eye point of view and be able to kind of get into the story as well as learn something from that narrative.
Yeah, that was the point. I felt like, because words have so much power. And as soon as a lot of folks hear the buzzword mental health or anxiety or depression, a wall goes up. And I understand because so many of us still don't identify with mental health being part of our overall health. And so I thought I could be a little sneaky, be a little bit slick, and slide that in there, that narrative, without folks really realizing that they're getting all of this abundant information and education around how to self-care when stress becomes overwhelming, or when, anxiety becomes overwhelming, because for so many of us, anxiety is a part of our day-to-day now, specifically with social media being so rampant in our lives. And also this thing that never leaves our side, our telephones. So we're always on call. Work doesn't end at 5 or 6. Kids done with school when they leave the premises. And so this anxiety creeps in no matter what. And then with our current state of affairs in our country, we're all a little anxious, a little on edge about things from day to day. If it's a shooting that took place in a mall or in a classroom, or if it's, who our next president is getting ready to be. And so I think that having these active tools and having this direct access to therapy, the sessions that happen in the book on the pages, I think can be a real game changer for a lot of people.
One thing I enjoyed with this book is some of the small details that you put in here, references, because I always ask the authors, somewhat about their writing process. Usually have one question or so in there about that. And I like how you use things like getting tongue-tied in front of a group of people. And this really brought me back to when I was a kid at the age of Brooklyn, practicing a speech in front of your stuffed animals and then getting caught and feeling really embarrassed about it. Where do you pull in that kind of thing as a writer? Is it from conversations with family, with other kids, or does it just come in naturally?
That's a great question. I'll say that 90% of what I put on the pages has come from personal experience. So I'm that kid, an adult now, but I was that kid who lined up the teddy bears when I had to give a speech in school. And I was in the school choir, not because I could sing, but because I was a really good speaker. And so I did all of the speaking parts between the songs, like at the big Christmas pageants and things like that. So I've always loved public speaking, and I took it I took it seriously, even as a 6-year-old. And I'd be home in front of my mirror practicing. And then when I got it down, I'd say, okay, there won't be a mirror there when I'm on stage or when I'm making the morning announcements over the microphone. So then I line up my teddy bears, and they were my audience. And so that ends up in the book. Or I remember so many people saying, imagine the audience in their underwear. And that goes back to, I don't know, I'm an old lady. So that goes way back to when I was a kid. And so I'm like, all right, let's have Brooklyn being told, imagine your peers in their Fruit of the Looms. And then I'm like, wait, Fruit of the Loom still a thing? Like, so then like I gotta research that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But all the really kind of quirky, really like cute, adorable things are things that happened in my childhood for the most part that I've held on to. Or that other 10%, if it didn't happen directly to me, there are things that I've observed that I've taken mental note of because for whatever reason, it resonated with me. And usually it's something that'll make me go, "Aw," and so then it ends up on the pages.
Well, if someone wants to order your book, where did they find it?
Okay, so Cookie Monsters is available at Barnes and Noble, well, anywhere books are sold, first of all, online. So there's that. But then if they want to venture out into the world, Barnes and Noble for sure, and Squad Goals, which is the book that's out now.
Mm-hmm.
Cookie Monsters comes out on the 17th. Squad Goals is out now. And a lot of the characters in Cookie Monsters made their initial entrance in Squad Goals, and that's in Target. So check Target for Cookie Monsters. It should be there, but I know for sure Barnes & Noble, and then anywhere online where books are sold.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Erica Kendrick, for joining us on the BIN.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's this edition of Color Between the Lines. I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network.